Bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong. This is Joe, the bearded historian. He'll tell you an interesting story. Be careful of his soldiers, they can be brats. This is Angel, she's an entity. She'll cause chaos and plant her hands at you. This is Sue, she likes spirits, not the alcohol. She's the reason this channel exists. This is David, he likes fire trucks. He's here occasionally. Bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong. We preserve his story.
It's late. I'm late. This is going to be Wayback Wednesday on Thursday because it took all freaking day to put the pictures in order. And I was too busy to do a shout out until this minute, so you guys are getting a very late shout out before I go to bed. I'm tired, my head hurts, and so here we go. Shout out time. Here's a shout out just for you. You support me, so I support you. This shout out is for our friends. Let's see how it is today. And I have chosen a moose race because we went and saw Normal, and there's a moose. I haven't seen Normal. You should see it. It's kind of hilariously funny. And it can be a little bit graphic and gory, though, but it was fun. We enjoyed it. Okay, let's see here. We've got Hugh, Josie, Kylie, Tessa, Anthony, and my girl, Cinephile, Kenny, Debbie, Sandra, Peach, Rushmore, Tom Grace, Gen X, American Wife, Vaughn, Fine, Big Ben, A-Space, Surfer, Eddie, Tate, Weezer, Surfer, April, Jerry, David and Morrissey, Mary, my Linda, Aishu, Popcorn, Elsie. Cruising is fun is a run. Alright, cruising is fun anytime is Cheryl and Jeremy. They are a couple, they like traveling. A few random rogs and that's they're traveling, and some shorts of them having fun and traveling and food. And of course the lives, you hang out, interact, listen to people's travels and fun ideas and best way to travel, best places to travel, best cruises to travel, all that fun stuff. So check them out, like, share, comment, have a good day. Alright, fellows. The bearded historian is going to do a topic that is very interesting to him, and hopefully you will find it interesting. I'm going to try to pay attention, but I'm tired. My head hurts. I have to work tomorrow. I still have to go with
unique pictures.
My brain went with coupons, and I'm just like, that's not what I need. This is how my brain is just like all over the place. Okay, anyway, on to the serious topics.
All right.
Of things that we need to do.
Okay. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, sometime in the evening, sometime. Anyway, today's topic. They made the movie not too long ago, and surprisingly enough, it did remarkably well. I just looked it up, and it almost made $1 billion in the box office. Of course, it cost $100 million to make, but that's beside the point. Still, it was one of the best movies of World War II, and it basically focused on one man and his efforts, as they like to call him, as the father of the atomic bomb. We're talking about J. Robert Oppenheimer, or Julius Robert Oppenheimer, born on April 22nd, 1904, passed away in 1967, February 18th. Now, as we like to play usually, we play with history. Go back to the early life of this fellow. He was in a non-observant family in New York City to Ella painter, and Julius Siegelman Oppenheimer, a successful textile importer. He had a younger brother named Frank, who also would become a physicist. And his father was born in Hanau, where he was part of the Alsace-Moselle province in the Kingdom of Prussia. And as a teenager, made his way to the United States in 1888 without money, higher education, or even English. Well, he was hired by a textile company, and within a decade was an executive there, becoming wealthy. And in 1912, the family moved to an apartment on Riverside Drive near West 88th Street, Upper West Side, New York. Their art collection included works of Pablo Picasso, Edward Villard, and Vincent van Gogh. Nice art collection.
What?
Oppenheimer was initially educated at Alequin Preparatory School, and in 1911 he entered the Ethical Culture Society School, founded by Felix Adler, to promote training based on the ethical movement, whose motto was Deed Before Creed. Oppenheimer's father had been a member of the society for many years, serving on its board of trustees. Oppenheimer was a versatile student, interested in English and French literature, and particularly mineralogy. He completed 3rd and 4th grades in 1 year, skipped half of 8th grade, and he took private music lessons by famous French flutist Georges Barrard. During his final year in school, Oppenheimer became interested in chemistry. He graduated in 1921, but his further education was delayed a year by an attack of colitis contracted while prospecting in Zhokmov during a family vacation in Czechoslovakia. He recovered in New Mexico, where he developed a love for horseback riding in the southwestern United States. Well, Oppenheimer would enter Harvard College in 1922.
Of course.
Of course. Age 18, and he majored in chemistry. Harvard also required studies in history, literature, philosophy, or mathematics. To compensate for the delay caused by his illness, he took 6 courses each term instead of the usual 4. He was admitted to the Undergraduate Honor Society, Pi Beta Kappa, and granted graduate standing in physics on the basis of independent study, allowing him to bypass basic courses and favored advanced ones. He was attracted to the experimental physics by a course on thermodynamics taught by Percy Bridgman. Oppenheimer graduated from Harvard in 1925 with a Bachelor of Arts, summa cum laude, after only 3 years of study. This guy was a marathoner. Just rammed this subject through his ear. No kidding, yeah. He's going to learn English with one hand and French with the other hand. After being accepted at Christ College in Cambridge in 1924, Oppenheimer wrote to Ernest Rutherford requesting permission to work at the Cavendish Laboratory. Through Bridgman's letter of recommendation said that Oppenheimer's clumsiness in the laboratory suggested the theoretical rather than experimental physics would be his forte. Rutherford was unimpressed, but Oppenheimer went to Cambridge nonetheless. J. Thomson ultimately accepted him on the condition that he complete a basic laboratory course. Well, Oppenheimer was very unhappy at Cambridge and wrote to his friend, "I'm having a pretty bad time. The lab work is a terrible bore, and I'm so bad at it that it is impossible to feel that I'm learning anything." He developed an antagonistic relationship with the tutor, Patrick Blackett, a future Nobel laureate, and according to Oppenheimer's friend, Francis Ferguson, Oppenheimer once confessed to leaving a poisoned apple at Blackett's desk, and Oppenheimer's parents convinced the university authorities not to expel him. There are no records of either the poison incident or probation, but Oppenheimer had regular sessions with a psychiatrist on Harley Street, London, and according to Charles Oppenheimer, his grandson, the poison apple story is unsubstantiated, and American Prometheus conceded that it is unproven. Oppenheimer was a tall, thin chain smoker who often neglected to eat during periods of intense concentration. Many friends said that he could be self-destructive. Ferguson once tried to distract Oppenheimer from apparent depression by telling him about how his girlfriend, Frances Keeley, and how he proposed to her.
Interesting.
Oppenheimer jumped on Ferguson and tried to strangle him.
Well then.
Gee, don't think that went over well. Oppenheimer was plagued by periods of depression throughout his life and once told his brother, "I need physics more than friends." Well, in 1926, Oppenheimer left Cambridge for the University of Göttingen to study under Max Born. Göttingen was one of the world's leading centers for theoretical physics. Oppenheimer made friends who went on to great success, including Werner Heisenberg, Pascal Jordan, Wolfgang Pauli, Paul Dirac, Enrico Fermi, and Edward Teller. Okay, if anybody wants to know what all these guys have in common, think radioactivity.
Boom!
He was enthusiastic in discussions to the point of sometimes taking them over. Marie Goeppert presented Born with a petition signed by herself and others threatening the boycott of the class unless he made Oppenheimer quiet down. Yeesh. Born left it out on his desk where Oppenheimer could read it, and it was effective without getting a word being said. Oppenheimer obtained his Doctor of Philosophy degree in March of 1927 at age 23, supervised by Born. After an oral exam, James Frank, the professor administrator, reportedly said, "I'm glad that's over. He was at the point of questioning me." Oppenheimer published more than a dozen papers while in Europe, including many important contributions in the new field of quantum mechanics. He and Born published a famous paper on the Born-Oppenheimer approximation, which separates nuclear motion from electronic motion in the mathematical treatment of molecules, allowing nuclear motion to be neglected to simplify calculations. It remains his most cited work. Now, Oppenheimer was awarded the United States National Research Council Fellowship in the California Institute of Technology, Caltech, on September of 1927. Bridgman also wanted him at Harvard, so a compromise was reached, whereby he split his fellowship for the 1927-28 academic year between Harvard in 27 and Caltech in 28. At Caltech, he struck up a close friendship with Linus Pauling. They planned to mount a joint attack on the nature of the chemical bond, a field which Pauling was a pioneer, with Oppenheimer supplying the mathematics and Pauling interpreting the results. The collaboration and their friendship ended after Oppenheimer invited Pauling's wife, Eva Helen Pauling, to join him on a tryst to Mexico. Ooh. Oppenheimer later involved Pauling to the head of the chemistry division for the Manhattan Project, but Pauling refused, saying he was a pacifist. In the autumn of 1928, Oppenheimer visited Paul Ehrenfest's Institute, the University of Leiden in the Netherlands, where he was impressed by giving lectures in Dutch despite having little experience with the language. There he was given the nickname of Opie, later angelicized by the students as Opie. Later from London, he continued to the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich to work with Wolfgang Paul on quantum mechanics and continuous spectrum. Oppenheimer respected and liked Paul and may have emulated his personal style as well as the critical approach on problems. So this guy was out here walking through Europe. I'll stop here, I'll stop there, I'll talk to these guys, and apparently he just loved talking about the whole mechanics of it all, and they were glad to have somebody with that egg of a head. He enjoyed the subjects he was working with. So
share the knowledge. I have no knowledge.
Now, back to the U.S., Oppenheimer accepted an associate professorship from the University of California, Berkeley, where Raymond Thayer Burge wanted him so badly that he expressed a willingness to share him with Caltech. Before he began his Berkeley professorship, Oppenheimer was diagnosed with a mild case of tuberculosis and spent some weeks with his brother, Frank, at a New Mexico ranch where he leased and eventually purchased. When he heard the ranch was available for lease, he exclaimed, "Hot dog!" and he later called it perro caliente, or hot dog in Spanish. Later he used to say that physics and desert country were two great loves. He recovered from tuberculosis and returned to Berkeley, where he prospered as an advisor and collaborator to a generation of physicists who admired him for his intellectual virtuosity and broad interests. His students and colleagues saw him as mesmerizing. hypnotic in private interaction, but also almost frigid in more public settings. His associates fell into two camps. One saw him as aloof and an impressive genius and austere, the other as pretentious, insecure posture. His students almost always fell into the former category, adopting the walk, speech, and their mannerisms, and even his inclination for reading entire texts in their original languages. Hans Berth said of him, "Probably the most important ingredient he brought to his teaching was his exquisite taste. He always knew what were the important problems, as shown by his choice of subjects. He truly lived with these problems, struggling for a solution, and he communicated his concerns to the group. In his heyday, there were about 8 to 10 graduate students in the group and about 6 postdoctoral fellows. He met this group once a day in his office, and they discussed with one after another the status of the students' research problems. He was interested in everything, and in one afternoon they might discuss quantum electrodynamics, cosmic rays, electron pair production, and nuclear physics." Can you just imagine a group of the 16 guys just wandering around in one room? They're sitting there bumping into each other. And, "Aren't you guys supposed to be in class? This is our class, you know. Study, you know." Now, Oppenheimer worked closely with Nobel Prize-winning experimental physicist Ernest Lawrence and his cyclotron pioneers, helping them understand the data that their machines were producing at Berkeley's Radiation Laboratory, which eventually developed into today's Lawrence Berkeley's National Laboratory. In 1936, Berkeley promoted him to full professor at an annual salary of $3,300. This is about equivalent to $77,000 in our money these days. In return, he was asked to curtail his teaching at Caltech, so a compromise was reached whereby Berkeley released him for 6 weeks each year, enough to teach one term at Caltech. Oppenheimer repeatedly attempted to get Robert Serber a position at Berkeley, but he was blocked by Berth, who felt that one Jew in the department was enough. Ouch. Now, Oppenheimer did important research in astrophysics, especially related to general relativity and nuclear theory, nuclear physics, spectrometry.
Oh my goodness.
Quantum field theory. Yeah. If it's got more than 6 decimals, more than 6, big words.
Big words.
Big words. Quantum field theory, and including his extension into quantum electrodynamics. His most significant work involved predictions about neutron stars, which was not observed until 1967. This guy was batting out of the box.
Right.
Now, initially, his major interest was the theory of continuous spectrum. His first published paper, in 1926, concerned the quantum theory of molecular band spectra. He developed a method to carry out calculations of transition probabilities. He calculated the photoelectric effect for hydrogen and X-rays, obtaining the absorption coefficient of the K-edge. His calculations accorded the observations of X-ray absorption of the sun, but not helium. Years later, it was realized that the sun was largely composed of hydrogen, and that his calculations were correct. This guy, again, 3 decades ahead of his time. Oppenheimer made important contributions to the theory of cosmic ray showers. He also worked on the problems of the field electron emission. This work contributed to the development of the concept of quantum tunneling. In 1931, he co-wrote a paper, Relativistic Theory of the Photoelectric Effect, with his student Harvey Hall, in which, based on empirical evidence, he correctly disputed Paul Dirac's assertion that 2 of the energy levels of the hydrogen atom have the same energy. Subsequently, one of his doctoral students, Willis Lamb, determined that the consequence was what became known as the Lamb shift, for which Lamb was awarded a Nobel Prize in Physics in 1955. Now, with Melba Phillips, the first graduate student to begin her PhD under Oppenheimer's supervision, Oppenheimer worked on calculations of artificial radioactivity under bombardment by neutrons. When Ernest Lawrence and Edwin McMillan bombarded nuclei with neutrons, they found the results agreed closely with the predictions of George Gamow, but with higher energies and heavier nuclei were involved, the results did not conform to the predictions. In 1935, Oppenheimer and Phillips worked out a theory, subsequently known as the Oppenheimer-Phillips process, to explain the results. The theory is still in use today.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. As early as 1930, Oppenheimer wrote a paper that essentially predicted the existence of the positron. This was after a paper by Dirac proposed that electrons could have a positive charge and a negative energy. Dirac's paper introduced the equation, later known as the Dirac equation, that unified quantum mechanics, specifically relativity, and the then new effect concept of the electron's spin to explain the Zeeman effect. Drawing on the body of experimental evidence, Oppenheimer rejected the idea that predicted positively charged electrons were protons. He argued that they would have to have the same mass as an electron, whereas experiments showed that protons were much heavier than electrons. 2 years later, Carl David Anderson discovered the positron, and he received the 1936 Nobel Prize in Physics. Well, in the late 1930s, Oppenheimer became interested in astrophysics, most likely through his friendship with Richard Tolman, resulting in a series of papers. And the first of these, on the stability of stellar neutron cores in 1938, co-written by Serber, Oppenheimer explored the properties of white dwarfs. This was followed by a paper co-written with one of his students, George Voska, on massive neutron cores, which demonstrated that there was a limit, known then as the Tolman-Oppenheimer-Volkoff limit, to the mass of stars beyond they would not remain stable as neutron stars and would undergo a gravitational collapse. In 1839, Oppenheimer and another one of his students, Harlan Snyder, produced a paper on continued gravitational contraction, which predicted the existence of what was later would become termed black holes. After the Bonn-Oppenheimer approximation paper, these papers remained the most cited and were the key factors in the rejuvenation of astrophysical research in the United States in the 50s, mainly by John A. Wheeler. And today we still like reading and studying about black holes.
Hole.
How?
It went into the hole.
You can't see the hole because it's, well, black. Now, Oppenheimer's papers were consistently considered difficult to understand even by the standards of the abstract topics he was an expert in. He was fond of using elegant and extremely complex mathematical techniques to demonstrate physical principles, though he sometimes was criticized for making mathematical mistakes, presumably out of haste. His physics were good, said his student Snyder, but his arithmetic was awful. After World War II, Oppenheimer published only 5 scientific papers, one of them in biophysics, and none after 1950. Murray Gell Marin, a later Nobelist who, as a visiting scientist, worked with him at the Institute for Advanced Study in 1951, offered this opinion. He didn't have much sitch or sitting flesh when you sit in a chair. As far as I know, he never wrote a long paper or did a long calculation, anything of that kind. He didn't have the patience for that. His own work consisted of little asparagus, but quite brilliant ones. But he inspired other people to do things, and his influence was fantastic. Now, Oppenheimer's mother died in 1931, after which he grew closer to his father, though, while still residing in New York, became a frequent visitor to California. When his dad died in 1937, leaving $392,000 to be divided between Oppenheimer and his brother Frank, Oppenheimer promptly wrote a will bequeathing his estate to the University of California to fund graduate scholarships. Well, that's kind of nice. In politics, in 1920, Oppenheimer remained uninformed about world affairs. He claimed that he did not read newspapers or popular magazines and only learned of the Wall Street crash in 1929 while out on a walk with Ernest Lawrence 6 months after it occurred. He once remarked he had never cast a vote until the 1936 presidential election, and from 1934 on, he became increasingly concerned about politics and international affairs. In 1934, he earmarked 3% of his annual salary, about $100, for 2 years to support German physicists during fleeing Nazi Germany. During the 1934 West Coast waterfront strike, he and some of the students, including Melvin Phillips and Serber, attended a longshoreman rally. After the Spanish War broke out in 1936, Oppenheimer hosted fundraisers for the Spanish Republican cause. In 1939, he joined the American Committee for Democracy and Intellectual Freedom, which campaigned against the persecution of Jewish scientists in Nazi Germany. Like most liberal groups of the era, the committee was later branded a communist front. Many of Oppenheimer's closest associates were active in the Communist Party in the 30s and 40s, including his brother Frank, Frank's wife Jackie, Kitty, Jean Tatlock, his landlady Mary Ellen Washburn, and several of the graduate students at Berkeley. Whether Oppenheimer was a party member has been debated. Cassidy states that she never openly joined the Communist Party USA, but Hayes, Clear, and Vasily state that was in fact a concealed member of the CPUSA in the late 1930s. From 1937 to 1942, Oppenheimer was a member at Berkeley of what he called a discussion group with fellow members Hackett Chevalier and Gordon Griffiths, later said was a closed secret unit of the Communist Party for Berkeley faculty. The FBI opened a file on Oppenheimer in March of 1941. It recorded that he attended a meeting in December of 1940 at Chevalier's home, and also attended by the Communist Party California State Secretary William Schneiderman and its treasurer Isaac Volkov. The FBI noted that Oppenheimer was on the executive committee of the ACLU, which is considered a Communist Front organization. Shortly thereafter, the FBI added Oppenheimer to its custodial detention index for arrest in case of national emergency. Well, when he had joined the Manhattan Project in 1942, Oppenheimer wrote on his personal security questionnaire that he'd been a member of just about every Communist Front organization on the West Coast. Years later, he claimed he did not remember writing this, that it was not true, and that if he had written anything along those lines, it was a half-jocular overstatement. He was a subscriber to the People's World, a Communist Party organ, and testified in 1954, "I was associated with the communist movement." In 1953, Oppenheimer was on the sponsor committee of the Conference of Science and Freedom, organized by the Congress of Cultural Freedom, an anti-communist cultural organization. In 1954, at the security clearance hearings, Oppenheimer denied being a member of the Communist Party, but identified himself as a fellow traveler, which he defined as someone who agrees with many of the communism's goals, but is not willing to blindly follow orders from any Communist Party apparatus. According to biographer Ray Monk, he was a very practical and real sense supporter of the Communist Party. Moreover, in terms of the time and effort and money spent on party activities, he was a very committed supporter. Now, in 1936, Oppenheimer became involved with Jean Tatlock, the daughter of the Berkeley literature professor and student at Stanford University School of Medicine. The two had similar political views. She wrote for the Western Worker, a Communist Party newspaper, and in 1939, after a tempestuous relationship, Tatlock broke up with Oppenheimer. In August of that year, he met Kitty Puning, a former Communist Party member. Kitty's first marriage lasted only a few months. Her second common-law husband from 1934 to 1937 was Joe Dowlett, an active member of the Communist Party, killed in 1937 in the Spanish Civil War. Kitty returned from Europe to the U.S., where she obtained a Bachelor of Arts degree in botany from the University of Pennsylvania, and in 1938 she married Richard Harrison, a physicist and medical researcher, and in the end of June 1939 moved in with him in Pasadena, California, where he became chief of radiology at the local hospital, and she enrolled as a graduate student at the University of California, Los Angeles. She and Oppenheimer created many created a minor scandal by sleeping together after one of Tolman's parties, and in the summer of 1940 she stayed with Oppenheimer at his ranch in New Mexico. When she became pregnant, Kitty asked Harrison for a divorce, and he agreed to it. On November 1st, 1940, she obtained a quick divorce in Reno, Nevada, and married Oppenheimer. Their first child, Peter, was born in May 1941, and their second, Catherine, or Tony, was born in Los Alamos, New Mexico, on December 7th, 1944. During his marriage, Oppenheimer rekindled his affair with Tatlock. Later, their continued contact became an issue in the security clearance hearings because of Tatlock's communist associations. Throughout the development of the atomic bomb, Oppenheimer was under investigation by both the FBI and the Manhattan Project's internal security arm for his past left-wing associations. He was followed by Army security agents during a trip to California in June 1943 to visit Tatlock, who was suffering from depression. Oppenheimer spent the night in her apartment. Tatlock killed herself on June 4th, 1944, leaving Oppenheimer deeply grieved. At Los Alamos, Oppenheimer began an emotional affair with Ruth Tolman, a psychologist and the wife of his friend Richard Tolman. Their affair ended after Oppenheimer returned east to become director of the Institute of Advanced Study, but after Richard's death in 1948, they reconnected and saw each other occasionally until Ruth's death in 1957. Few of their letters survive, but those do reflect a close and affectionate relationship, with Oppenheimer calling her "my love." This also interesting items. Oppenheimer's diverse interests also interrupted his focus on science. He liked things that were difficult, and since much of his scientific work appeared easy to him, he developed an interest in the mystical and the cryptic. After going to Harvard, he began to acquaint himself with classical Hindu texts through the English translations. He also had an interest in learning languages and learned Sanskrit under Arthur W. Ryder at Berkeley in 1933. He eventually read the works of Bhagavad Gita and Meghadartha in the original Sanskrit and deeply pondered them. He later cited Gita as one of the books that most shaped the philosophy of his life. He wrote to his brother that Gita was very easy, quite marvelous. He later called it the most beautiful philosophical song existing in any known tongue, and gave copies of it as presents to his friends, and kept a personal worn-out copy on the bookshelf of his desk. He often referred to it while directing the Los Alamos Laboratory, and quoted a passage from the Gita at the memorial service of President Franklin Roosevelt at Los Alamos. He nicknamed his car Garuta, the mount bird of the Hindu god Vishnu. Oppenheimer never became a Hindu in the traditional sense. He did not join any temple nor pray to any god. He was really taken by the charm and the general wisdom of the Bhagavad Gita, his brother said. It is speculated Oppenheimer's interest in Hindu thought started with his earlier association with Niels Bohr. Both Bohr and Oppenheimer have been very analytical and critical about the ancient Hindu mythological stories and the metaphysics embedded in them. In one conversation with David Hawkins before the war, he talked about the literature of ancient Greece. Oppenheimer remarked, "I've read the Greeks and I find the Hindus deeper." Oppenheimer sat on the board of editors of the book of World Perspectives, which published a variety of books on philosophy. During the 1930s, while teaching at Berkeley, Oppenheimer became part of the group in the Bay Area that psychologist Sigfrid Bernfeld convened to discuss psychoanalysis. His close confidant colleague, Isidore Isaac Bobby, who had seen Oppenheimer throughout his Berkeley, Los Alamos, and Princeton years, wondered why many men of Oppenheimer's gifts do not discover everything worth discovering. Reflected that Oppenheimer was overeducated in those fields which lie outside the scientific tradition, such as his interest in religion, in which the Hindu religion in particular, which resulted in a feeling for the mystery of the universe that surrounded him almost like a fog. He saw physics clearly, looking toward what had already been done, but at the border he tended to feel there was much more of the mysterious and novel than there actually was. He turned away from the hard, crude methods of theoretical physics into a mystical realm of broad intuition. In Oppenheimer, the element of earthiness was feeble, yet it was essentially the spiritual quality, the refinement of expressed in speech and manner, that was the basis of his charisma. He never expressed himself completely. He always left a feeling that there were depths of sensibility and insight yet not revealed. These may be the qualities of a born leader who seems to have reserves of uncommitted strength. Now, in spite of this, observers such as physicist Luis Alvarez and Jeremy Bernstein have suggested that it was Oppenheimer had lived long enough to see his predictions substantiated by experiment. He might have won a Nobel Prize for his work on gravitational collapse concerning neutron stars and black holes. In retrospect, some physicists and historians consider this his most important contribution, though it was not taken up by other scientists in his lifetime. The physicist and historian Abraham Paus once asked Oppenheimer that what he considered his most important scientific contributions. Oppenheimer cited his work on electrons and positrons, not his work on gravitational contraction. Oppenheimer was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize in physics 4 times, in 46, 51, 55, and 67, but never won. Now, most of us know, his bread and butter. I mean,
Do we?
Oppenheimer, Los Alamos. It's just, because, I mean, after all, it was a city that was basically built off of the need to develop the bomb. During a visit to California, Berkeley, in September 1941, Austrian physicist Mark Oliphant briefed Oppenheimer about the UK's atomic bomb program in its Maud report. October 9, 1941, 2 months before the United States entered World War II, President Roosevelt approved a crash program to develop the atomic bomb. On October 21st, Ernest Lawrence brought Oppenheimer to what became the Manhattan Project. Oppenheimer was assigned to take over the project-specific bomb design research by Arthur Compton at the Metallurgical Laboratory. And on May 18, 1942, Gregory Brent was resigned due to security concerns and skepticism towards the project. Not long after that, Arthur Compton asked Oppenheimer to take over work on the fast neutron calculations from Brent, a task Oppenheimer threw himself into with full vigor. He was given the title Coordinator of Rapid Rupture being the technical term that refers to the propagation of a fast neutron chain reaction in an atomic bomb. One of his first acts that summer was hosting a summer school for atomic bomb theory in Berkeley. The mix of European physicists and his own students, that including Serber, Emil Kaponsky, Felix Bloch, Hans Berth, and Edward Teller, kept themselves busy about calculating what needed to be done in order what to make the bomb. Well, in June of 1942, the U.S. Army established the Manhattan Engineer District to handle the part of the atomic bomb project, beginning with the process of transferring responsibility from the Office of Scientific Research and Development to the military. In September, Brigadier General Leslie R. Groves, Jr. was appointed director of what became known as the Manhattan Project. By October 12, 1942, Groves and Oppenheimer decided that for security and cohesion, they needed to establish a centralized secret research laboratory in a remote location. Well, Groves selected Oppenheimer to head this project's secret weapons laboratory, though it is not known precisely when. On October 15, 1942, after a meeting in Chicago on the Manhattan Project, Groves invited Oppenheimer to join himself, James C. Marshall, and Kenneth Nichols on their return trip to New York at the 20th Century Limited. After dinner on the train, they discussed the project. After Oppenheimer left the train, none of the three could name another suitable scientist to head the project. Shortly after, Oppenheimer was appointed to head the Los Alamos Laboratory. Gee, place out in the middle of nowhere. Now, this decision surprised many because Oppenheimer had left-wing political views and no record as a leader of large projects. Groves worried that because Oppenheimer did not have a Nobel Prize, he might not have the prestige to direct fellow scientists, but Groves was impressed by Oppenheimer's singular grasp of the practical aspects of the project and by the breadth of knowledge. As a military engineer, Groves knew that this would be vital in the interdisciplinary project that would involve not just physics, but also chemistry, metallurgy, ordnance, and engineering. Groves also detected in Oppenheimer something that many others did not, an overweening ambition, which Groves reckoned would supply the drive necessary to push the project to a successful conclusion. Oppenheimer's past associations were not overlooked, but on July 20th, 1943, Groves directed that he receive a security clearance without delay, irrespective of the information which you may have heard concerning Mr. Oppenheimer. He is absolutely essential to this project. Having considered Oppenheimer's appointment a real stroke of genius on the part of the General, Groves was not generally considered to be a genius. Oppenheimer favored a location for the laboratory in New Mexico, not far from his ranch, and on November 16, 1942, he, Groves, and others toured a prospective site. Oppenheimer feared the high cliff surrounding would feel claustrophobic and was concerned about possible flooding. He then suggested a site that was, well, flat mesa near the Santa Fe, New Mexico, which would be the private boys' school, the Los Alamos Ranch School. The engineers were concerned about the poor access road, the water supply, but otherwise felt it was ideal. The Los Alamos Laboratory was built on the site of the school, taking over some of the buildings, while many new buildings were erected in great haste. At the laboratory, Oppenheimer assembled a group of top physicists at the time, whom he called the luminaries. Now, Los Alamos was initially supposed to be a military laboratory, and Oppenheimer and other researchers were to be commissioned into the Army. He went so far as to order himself a lieutenant colonel's uniform and take the Army physical test, which he failed. Army doctors considered him underweight at 128 pounds, diagnosed his chronic cough as tuberculosis, and were concerned about his chronic lumocracer joint pain. The plan to commission scientists fell through when Robbie and Robert Barcher balked at the idea. James B. Conant, Groves, and Oppenheimer devised a compromise whereby the University of California operated the laboratory under contract to the War Department. Soon turned out that Oppenheimer had hugely underestimated the magnitude of the project. Los Alamos grew from a few hundred people in 1943 to about 6,000 in 1945. Now, scientists were paid at the salary which was already receiving. However, that meant Oppenheimer, who had been paid a state university, originally received much less than some of the subordinates. Graves decided to make an exception and increased his salary to be equal with that of the others without consulting them. Oppenheimer first had difficulty with the organizational division of large groups, but rapidly learned the art of large-scale administration after he took up permanent residence at Los Alamos. He is noted for his mastery of all scientific aspects of the project and for his efforts to control the inevitable cultural conflicts between scientists and the military. Victor Weisskopf wrote, Oppenheimer directed these studies, theoretical experiments in the real sense of the words. Here, his uncanny speed of grasping at main points of any subject were a decisive factor. He could acquaint himself with the essential details of every part of the work. He did not direct from the head office. He was intellectually and physically present in each decisive step. He was present at the laboratory or in seminar rooms. When a new effect was measured, when a new idea was conceived, it was not that he had contributed so many ideas or suggestions. He did so sometimes, but his main influence came from something else. It was his continuous and intense presence which produced a sense of direct participation in all of us. It created a unique atmosphere of enthusiasm and challenge that pervaded the place throughout the time. Now, at this point in the war, there was considerable anxiety about the scientists from the German nuclear weapons program might be progressing faster than the Manhattan Project. In a letter dated May 25, 1943, Oppenheimer responded to a proposal by Fermi to use radioactive materials to poison German food supplies. Oppenheimer asked Fermi whether he could produce enough strontium without letting too many in on the secret. Oppenheimer continued, I think we should not attempt to plan unless we could poison food sufficient to kill 500,000 men. In 1943, development efforts were directed at a plutonium gun-type fusion weapon called the Thin Man. Initial research on the properties of the plutonium was done using the cyclotron-generated plutonium-239, which is extremely pure but considered could be created only in tiny amounts. When Los Alamos received the first sample of plutonium from the X-10 graphite reactor in April 1944, a problem was discovered. A reactor-bred plutonium had a higher concentration of plutonium-240, 5 times that of the cyclotron plutonium, making it unsuitable for use in a gun-type weapon. In July 1944, Oppenheimer abandoned the Thin Man gun design in favor of an implosion-type weapon. A similar version of Thin Man became Little Boy. Using chemical explosive lenses, a subcritical sphere and fissile material could be squeezed into a smaller and denser form. The metal needed to travel only a very short distance, so the critical mass would be assembled in much less time. In August of that year, Oppenheimer implemented sweeping reorganization of the Los Alamos laboratory to focus on implosion. He concentrated the development efforts on the gun-type device, but now with a simpler design that only had to work with highly enriched uranium in one simple group. This device became the Little Boy in February of 1945. After a mammoth research effort, the more complex design of the implosion device, known as the Christie gadget after Robert Christie, another student of Oppenheimer's, was finalized as the Fat Man in a meeting of Oppenheimer's office on February 28, 1945. Both these names should be familiar for you students as the two bombs that took out Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Boom!
In 1945, an interim committee was created to advise and report on wartime and post-war policies regarding the use of nuclear energy. The interim committee established a scientific panel consisting of Oppenheimer, Arthur Compton, Fermi, and Lawrence, and advised it on scientific issues. Presentation to the interim committee, the panel offered its opinion not just on the atomic bomb's likely physical effects, but also on its likely military and political impact. This included options on such sensitive issues as whether the Soviet Union could be advised of the weapon in advance of its use against Japan. Later, we would discover the USSR was not very happy with us.
Oh, why not?
Because we had the bomb and they didn't.
Nah, that's not a reason.
Okay. Now, of course, all this led up to our famous first explosion, which we will commonly refer to as the Trinity. And as it happened, in the early morning hours of July 16, 1945, near Alamogordo, New Mexico, the work of Los Alamos culminated with the test of the first nuclear weapon, Trinity, had been codenamed at the site in mid-1944, saying later that the name came from John Donne's Holy Sonnets. He had been introduced to Donne's work in the 1930s by Jean Tatlock, who killed herself in January 1944. Brigadier General Thomas Farrell, who was present in the control bunker with Oppenheimer, recalled Dr. Oppenheimer, on whom had rested a very heavy burden, grew tenser as the last seconds ticked off. He scarcely breathed. He held onto a post to steady himself. For the last few seconds, he stared directly ahead, and then when the announcer shouted, "Now," there came this tremendous burst of light, followed shortly thereafter by the deep growling roar of the explosion. His face relaxed to expression of tremendous relief. Oppenheimer's brother Frank recalled Oppenheimer's first words as, "I guess it worked."
Cool.
Now, according to a 1949 magazine profile, which witnessed the explosion, Oppenheimer thought of versus the back of all is, if the radiance of the 1,000 suns were burst at once in the sky, that would have been the splendor of the mighty one. Now I am become death, the shatterer of worlds. In 1965, he recalls the moment this way. We knew the world would not be the same. A few people laughed, a few people cried. Most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty and impress him, take on his multi-armed form, and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." I suppose we all thought that one way or another. You have to sit back and just kind of look at what they just did. You know, it's kind of both great and awful, but you know what they were doing at that time was they were trying to find the weapon that could finally bring closure. But again, once you open up the Pandora's box, it was going to change the way the whole world looks at nuclear power from now on out. I mean, even now today, first we dealt with the Cold War, Russia facing, the USSR facing off against America. England got the bomb, France got the bomb. Now Pakistan and India have the bomb. Israel has the bomb. And it all came back from that one point where they were doing the research. I was just reading a thing the other day, how a project the Americans had done where we had snuck into Germany and stole a bunch of uranium because we discovered that they had so many tons of uranium stored in this one location in heavy water. So the Germans were working on one, but they weren't anywhere close to what we were.
Which is totally good.
Yeah, because who knows what they would have done if they would have gotten one.
Boom!
Yeah. Now, Ravi described seeing Oppenheimer somewhat later as, "I'll never forget his walk, like high noon, the kind of strut. He had done it." Despite many scientists' opposition using the bomb on Japan, Compton, Fermi, and Oppenheimer believed that a test explosion would not convince Japan to surrender. At the August 6th assembly in Los Alamos, the evening of the atomic bomb plague of Hiroshima, Oppenheimer took the stage and clasped his hands together like a prize-winning boxer when the crowd cheered. He expressed regret that the weapon was already too late for use against Nazi Germany. On August 17th, however, Oppenheimer traveled to Washington to hand-deliver a letter to Secretary of War Harry L. Stimson expressing his revulsion and his wish to see nuclear weapons banned. In October, he would meet with President Harry S. Truman, who dismissed Oppenheimer's concern about an arms race with the Soviet Union and the belief that the atomic energy should be under international control. Truman actually became infuriated as Oppenheimer said, "Mr. President, I feel I have blood on my hands," responding that he, Truman, bore sole responsibility for the decision to use the atomic weapons against Japan, and later said, "I don't want to see that son of a bitch in office ever again." For his services as director of Los Alamos, Oppenheimer was awarded the Medal of Merit by Truman in 1946. But as things would go, once the public learned of the Manhattan Project and the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Oppenheimer, suddenly a household name as the father of the atomic bomb, became a spokesman for science, emblematic of the new type of technocratic power, and would appear on the covers of Life and Time. Nuclear physics became a powerful force as nations realized the strategic and political power that atomic weapons conferred. Like many of the scientists of his generation, Oppenheimer felt that the security from atomic bombs could only come from a transnational organization such as the newly formed United Nations, which could institute a program to stifle the nuclear arms race. I will just say, I don't think the UN did anything to that nature. The big thing I look at is that, granted, they worked okay on smaller scale stuff in Africa, in Pacific Theater with the Korean War.
Right.
As far as bringing nuclear ordinance into a peaceful resolution, it wasn't one of their brighter moments.
No.
No. In 1945, Oppenheimer left Los Alamos to return to Caltech, but soon found his heart was no longer in teaching. In 1947, he accepted an offer from Lewis Strauss to take up the directorship of the Institute of Advanced Study in Princeton, New Jersey. This meant moving back east and leaving Ruth Tolman, who is the wife of a friend, Richard Tolman, with whom he began an affair after leaving Los Alamos. The job came with a salary of $20,000 per annum, plus free accommodation at the director's house, a 17th century manor with a cook and a groundskeeper surrounded by 265 acres of woodlands. Sounds rough. He collected European furniture and French post-impressionist and Fauvist artworks. His art collection included works by Cézanne, Derain, Desplat, de Vlaminck, Picasso, Rembrandt, Renoir, Van Gogh, and Vuillard. Lots of expensive paintings, obviously. Oppenheimer brought together intellectuals at the height of the powers from a variety of disciplines to answer the most pertinent questions of the age. He directed and encouraged the research of many well-known scientists, including Freeman Dyson, the duo of Qing Yang and Chung Dao Li, who won a Nobel Prize for the discovery of parity non-conservatism. He also instituted temporary memberships for scholars from the humanities, such as T.S. Eliot and George F. Kennan. Some of these activities were resented by a few members of the mathematics faculty, who wanted the Institute to stay a bastion of pure scientific research. Abraham Paz said that Oppenheimer himself thought that one of his failures at the Institute was being unable to bring together scholars from the natural sciences and the humanities. During a series of conferences in New York, the Shelter Island Conference in 1947, the Pocono Conference in 1948, and the Old Stone Conference in 1949, physicists transitioned from war work back to theoretical issues. Under Oppenheimer's direction, physicists tackled the greatest outstanding problem of the pre-war years: indefinite, divergent, and seemingly nonsensical expressions in the quantum electrodynamics of elementary particles. Julian Schwinger, Richard Feynman, Shinichiro Tokugawa tackled the problem of regularization and developed techniques that became known as renormalization. Freeman Dyson was able to prove that the procedures gave similar results. The problems of Mason absorption in Heidegger Iwasawa's theory of mesons as the carrier particles of strong nuclear force were also tackled. Probing questions from Oppenheimer prompted Robert Marshak's innovative two meson hypothesis. They were actually into the type of mesons, pions, and muons. This led to Cecil Frank Powell's breakthrough and subsequent Nobel Prize for the discovery of the pion. Oppenheimer served as the director of the Institute until 1966, when he gave up the position due to his failing health. In 2023, he is the longest-serving director of the Institute. As a member of the Board of Consultants and the committee appointed by Truman, Oppenheimer strongly influenced the 1946 Action-Linthal report. In this report, the Commission advocated the creation of an International Atomic Development Authority which would own all fissionable material and means of its production, such as mines and laboratories, and atomic power plants where it could be used for peaceful energy production. Bernard Brauch also was appointed to translate this report into a proposal to the United Nations, resulting in the Brauch Plan of 1946. The Brauch Plan introduced many additional provisions regarding endorsement, in particular requiring inspection of the Soviet Union's uranium resources. I bet that went over real well. It was seen as an attempt to maintain the United States' nuclear monopoly and rejected by the Soviets. With this, it became clear to Oppenheimer that the arms race was unavoidable due to the mutual suspicion of the U.S. and the USSR, which even Oppenheimer was starting to distrust. After the Atomic Energy Commission came into being in 1947 as a civilian agency in control of nuclear research and weapons issues, Oppenheimer was appointed as the chairman of the General Advisory Committee. From this position, he advised on a number of nuclear-related issues, including project funding, laboratory construction, and even international policy, though the GAC's advice was not always heeded. As chairman of the GAC, Oppenheimer lobbied vigorously for international arms control and funding for basic science, and attempted to influence policy away from the heated arms race. The first atomic bomb test by the Soviet Union in 1949 came earlier than the Americans expected, and over the next several months there was an intense debate whether the U.S. government, military, and scientific communities over whether to proceed with the development of far more powerful nuclear fusion-based hydrogen bomb, then known as the Super. Oppenheimer had been aware of the possibility of a thermonuclear weapon since the days of the Manhattan Project, and had allocated a limited amount of theoretical research towards that possibility at the time, but nothing more than that, given the pressing need to develop a fission weapon. Immediately following the end of the war, Oppenheimer argued that continuing with work on the Super at the time, due to both lack of need and the enormous human casualties that would result from its use. Now, in October of 1949, Oppenheimer and the GAC recommended against the development of the Super. He and the other GAC members were motivated partly by ethical concerns, feeling that such a weapon could only be strategically used, resulting in millions of deaths.
Very strategic.
Very strategic. And using the, therefore, carrying much further than the atomic bomb itself, a policy of exterminating civilian populations. They also had practical qualms, as there were no workable design for a hydrogen bomb at the time. Regarding the possibility that the Soviet Union developing a thermonuclear weapon, the GAC felt that the U.S. could have an adequate stockpile of atomic weapons to retaliate against any thermonuclear attack. In that connection, Oppenheimer and the others were concerned about the opportunity costs that would be incurred if nuclear reactors were diverted from materials needed for atomic bomb production to the materials such as tritium needed for a thermonuclear weapon. The majority of the AEC subsequently endorsed the GAC recommendations, and Oppenheimer thought that the fight against superweapons would triumph, but proponents of the weapon lobbied the White House vigorously. On January 31st, 1950, Truman, who was predisposed to proceed with the development of the weapons anyway, made the formal decision to do so. Oppenheimer and the GAC opponents of the project, particularly James V. Conant, felt disheartened and considered resigning from the committee. They stayed on, though their views of the hydrogen bomb were well known. In 1951, Teller and the mathematician Stanislaw Ulam developed the Teller-Ulam design for a hydrogen bomb. This new design seemed technically feasible, and Oppenheimer officially ascended to the weapon's development while still looking for ways in which the testing and deployment or use could be questioned. As he later recalled, the program we had in 1949 was a tortured thing that you could well argue did not make a great deal of technical sense. It was therefore possible to argue also that you did not want it even though you could have it. program in 1951 was technically so sweet that you could not argue about that. The issue became purely the military, the political, and the humane problem of what you were going to do about it once you had it. It's almost like he didn't want it, but they knew they could do it. Oppenheimer, Conant, and Lee Dubridge, another member of the opposed the H-bomb decision, left the GAC when their terms expired in August of 1952. Truman had declined to reappoint them as he wanted new voices on the committee who were more in support of H-bomb development. In addition, various opponents of Oppenheimer had communicated to Truman their desire that Oppenheimer leave the committee. Oppenheimer played a role in a number of government panels and study projects during the late 1940s and 1950s, some of which thrust him into controversies and power struggles. In 1948, Oppenheimer chaired the Department of Defense's Long-Range Objectives Panel, a body created by the AEC liaison Donald F. Carpenter. It looked to be the military utility of nuclear weapons, including how they might be delivered. After a year's worth of study in spring of 1952, Oppenheimer wrote the draft report of Project Gabriel, which examined the dangers of nuclear fallout. Oppenheimer also was a member of the Science Advisory Committee on the Office of Defense Mobilization. Oppenheimer participated in Project Charles during 1951, which examined the possibility of creating an effective air defense of the United States against atomic attack, and the follow-on Project East River in 1952, which, with Oppenheimer's input, recommended building a warning system that would provide 1 hour notice of a pending atomic attack on American cities. Those two projects led to Project Lincoln in 1952, a large effort in which Oppenheimer was one of the senior scientists. Undertaken at MIT Lincoln, which had been recently founded to study the issues of air defense, this in turn led to the Lincoln Summer Study Group, in which Oppenheimer became a key figure. Oppenheimer and other scientists, using the resources allocated to air defense in preference to large retaliatory strike capabilities, brought an immediate response of objection from the United States Air Force, and debate ensued on whether Oppenheimer and allied scientists or the Air Force were embracing an inflexible Maginot Line philosophy. In any case, the Summer Studies Group work eventually led to the building of the New Line, the Distant Early Warning Line. We know about that up there in northern Canada and Alaska.
I know nothing.
Now, Teller, who had been so uninterested in work at the atomic bomb at Los Alamos during the war, that Oppenheimer had given him time instead of work on his own project of the atomic bomb, left Los Alamos in 1951 to help found in 1852 a second laboratory which would become the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. Oppenheimer defended his history of work done at Los Alamos and opposed the creation of the second laboratory. Let's take and throw a bunch of money around and see if anybody does anything good with it.
Probably not.
Probably not.
Why would we?
We already built 2 big bombs. Let's build a third one. Let's see what else we can build.
We might as well, right?
Hey.
Why not?
Project Vista looked at improving U.S. tactical warfare capabilities. Oppenheimer was a late addition to the project, but wrote a key chapter in the report that challenged the doctrine of strategic bombardment and advocated smaller tactical nuclear weapons, which would be more useful in a limited theater conflict against enemy forces. Strategic thermonuclear weapons delivered by long-range bombers would necessarily be under control of the Air Force, whereas Vista conclusions recommended an increased role of the U.S. Army and Navy as well. The Air Force reaction to this was immediately hostile, and it succeeded in getting the Vista report suppressed. It's like, we'll give you an idea and we still don't want to accept it. Maybe they like just using basic bombs. I mean, after all, a couple of years later, they came up with something called the B-52 concept. But, as far as Oppenheimer went, they tried to move around a couple different panels. They tried to get him into different areas. Finally, the government just pulled its clearance on him. They said, we can't really trust you anymore to make positive decisions.
No, I would want her to do that.
I know. He did wind up, going back and doing some extra studies, but the big thing is that, here was the guy that helped you guys win World War II, and then, he did kind of turn his back on the whole nuclear idea. I think it would be I think it'd be a conflictive mindset that he was dealing with, because here he thought, he'd help win the war, but at the same time he didn't realize what that meant it was going to do. Kill a few million people with a bomb burst in Japan.
Right.
But that was our talk of the day on J. Oppenheimer, the father of the bomb.
The bomb.
But it's passed on. But we will see you folks next week unless Sue throws me out in the garbage.
I've already thrown it away.
Oh, no.
We're at 1 hour and 10 minutes.
Okay. Good night, folks. Have a good one.